Good morning, good leaders, and good morning, Dr. Tim Carey. How are you today?
Good morning, Vincent. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and I'm very glad to have you as the speaker for our podcast, for my podcast today. Do I call you Dr. Carey, or do you prefer me to call you Tim?
Tim is fine. I don't
Okay.
go by titles.
Because in Indonesia, usually we call Bapak. It's mean like
Oh,
Mr. Just a salutation.
okay.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
works.
And if I remember correctly, actually, you have been in Jakarta once, I guess, or maybe more, as a speaker. When was that? Do you remember?
Yes, in fact, I was looking at that the other day. I have some documents from there. I think it was about 2002 or 2003. Yeah,
Okay.
that was fun, actually. That was a
Okay.
good meeting.
I remember we put you in a hotel with a Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Yes, very nice.
Okay.
Those were the
Uh,
days.
yeah. Before we go further, can you talk more about yourself, maybe explaining who is Dr. Tim Carey actually?
All right, sure. So I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. I'm also a consultant and a lecturer at the university. I've done a lot of consulting after receiving my degree in industrial organizational psychology at the University of South Florida in about 2000. So much of my consulting has been in Asia. I lived in Hong Kong for about 19 years and traveled all over Asia doing consulting. Also worked in Europe and now much more in North America. So it's been a very interesting ride. A lot of assessment, training, and development of senior managers and leaders.
I see. And I think you mentioned that you're also a lecturer. Do you mind to share which university you lecture at?
Yeah, so I taught at the university or the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and that's has a pretty good psychology program. And I was teaching both undergrads and graduate students in industrial psychology, but also counseling and some basic introductory level psychology. So at the same time, I was also consulting. I was running a branch of a global consulting firm for about 14 years. So teaching, consulting worked out really well because I was very well versed on what was happening in the field in academics, and then I could apply that in consulting. And we also got some of the best students to come and work for us at the consulting firm. So it was a win-win.
So not only you talk about the theory and research, but the implementation in real world and how clients react and their ability to implement those theories.
Definitely. Yeah, and I was never really interested in doing research. I believe in it. We absolutely need it, and I really respect researchers. It's a tough job. But to me, it was more about the application. I was always interested in doing things like we did back in the day, assessing, training, and developing people. So that's really my passion.
Okay. I understand that your recent passion was related with resilience. Can you talk more about the background, why the interest to do more work on resilience?
Yeah, so this kind of came about a little bit before COVID hit us all, and then was kind of intensified or exacerbated by COVID. So we had noticed that a lot of companies, we at Cal Talent Solutions, where I'm a partner, had noticed that a lot of companies were, employees in a lot of companies were facing a lot of pressure to the point where there were suicides, some pretty well publicized events there, and also just a lot of work, a lot of pressure being put on employees. Then, as we started developing this test, and we can talk about how that was developed if that's helpful, we also ran into COVID. So as we're developing the test, we, suddenly this pandemic happens, and people who are normally very well adjusted and never had any emotional or psychological issues were suddenly now facing very tough times. And in addition, and I noticed that here in the US, that there were a serious lack of psychologists, like clinical psychologists, to help treat these people. So it was a kind of a double blow, this very intense, difficult situation for everyone, on top of pressure at work, and then no one to help them. So we at Cal started talking about, well, what can we do to manage this or to help people? And that's when we came up with the resilience inventory.
Okay. So you talk a lot about pressure, stress, initially from the work, then also because of the pandemic situation.
Yeah.
But then, did you define, or is there a definition on resilience?
I mean, yeah, it's basically maintaining or regaining a sense of well-being in the face of adversity. So something happens and you have to somehow maintain a sense of well-being. And I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, I talked to a guy who had lost his son, which was terrible. His son was in his teens, I think he was 16. And he said, I'm hanging on. I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to cope. So I'm just trying to get through this. So someone who is resilient would come back from that as much as you can, more quickly than someone who did not have all these protective factors, etc.
Okay. So is resilience, or in our psychologist term, we always ask this question: is resilience nature or nurture? Is that something that someone born with, or is that something that everyone can develop?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think the answer is both. You are born with traits, which we measure. And, traits might be, for example, optimism, or actually, perfectionism, or a sense of worthlessness, both of which are things that we measure. So those are relatively stable. And a lot of times you could say people are born with those. But you also have states. And this is, for example, the guy I was just talking about. He's in a terrible state because of some external thing that happened to him. And so we would consider that trauma. And a lot of people go through that, bullying, trauma at work. And those are just external factors. Those are states that we're in. So it's a little of both. And the question about, can you change it, or can you become more resilient? The answer is absolutely yes. So we'll talk about this probably in a bit, but there are protective factors. You can be more compassionate with yourself. You can be more mindful of your thoughts. And that goes right into the whole clinical psychology area. And the clinical psychologists, of which I'm not one, but I've always, my whole career has been around them. They have a lot of tools to help people who are facing trauma or facing well-being issues.
Okay. Yeah, so I remember a long time ago, I think there was a list on life event and the kind of like the strength of stress. They try to give point how much stress it create in a person when such life event happen, such as the death of spouse, the loss of a job, those kind of things, right? So that is the nurture part, the state that you mentioned, person is experiencing.
Yes, definitely. So you can build up defenses, and we can help you with that. I mean, you and I have definitely techniques that we can use, even as industrial psychologists, not clinicians. But some of these skills are pretty basic, and if we build those up, people can become amazingly resilient.
Okay. Now, talking about the nature part of resilience, you talk about traits, and that remind me of the Big Five, because one of the factors is neuroticism. So is there a correlation, or did you refer to Big Five when talking about resilience and developing an instrument to measure it?
Yeah, we've done some correlational research, and we've correlated some protective and some of the state and trait pieces, but we're still doing research, and our test is a little more targeted, and what we found is that the protective state and risk factors are somewhat related, but not entirely. And I think that's because we're more narrowly looking at personality than, say, the Big Five. Big Five is high level and general, and we're much more narrow and focused.
Okay. You talk about doing some continuous research on the instrument to measure this instrument that you have to measure resilience. Can you talk a bit more about the development to make sure, to ensure us that this is not the same test that people can take on any social media?
Yeah, there are plenty of those. And I always talk about a Vogue test, in Vogue magazine. It's a fashion magazine. And there are plenty of those tests, and they have absolutely no validity or reliability, as we know. So we started from theory. We looked at all the theories around resilience. From those, we developed a framework. From the framework, we developed 5,000 questions, and then from those, we narrowed them down to maybe a few hundred, 300 or 400. And we did this with the goal of creating a global resilience test, so cross-cultural, as much as one can. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to do. But we approached this with both Asian and Western psychologists. And what we came up with was probably about 100 questions. It doesn't take too long. But then we also went out and established norm groups. We now have about a data bank of 2,000 that we use for norms. It's growing every day. And we found very good reliability and validity, which is how, as you know, how we measure these tests. So we came up with a good product, and one that's actually different in that we're looking at not only, trait resilience factors or states, something that you're going through, but also the protective factors. Things like mindfulness, self-compassion, things that will help you manage resilience. So we have all three. that we're measuring. And from that, we can give very interesting feedback about where someone is, how they might do better at resilience, what their strengths are in terms of resilience, as well as what they're going through. So it's a really interesting tool, and we've been using it with companies to help them with employee burnout and other issues that employees are facing.
That sounds like a lot of work. I hope it didn't create too much pressure for you and your team. And I'm
We've
sure
all taken the test.
yeah, you are all resilient to finally able to come out with an instrument like this.
Yeah, we came close to burnout a few times developing this test, and it was a huge job. So
yeah,
so it was a challenge,
okay.
but we're happy with the result. So I think we can help a lot of people, which is a goal.
Tim, there are maybe stereotype, or I don't know whether to say it a stereotype or it's research based, but sometimes senior leader or senior people say that the younger, they are not resilient, they are strawberry generation, or for us in Asia, more like tofu generation.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you see or any of your data showing difference between the Gen X baby boomer compared to Gen Y and the Gen Z?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because colloquially, we hear a lot of people talking about, kids these days. Kids don't want to work as hard, aren't as resilient, and now I think legitimately are always, doing this on their phones, on their tablets. We have not found a specific difference between Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen X, the boomers. We've noticed that it's much more individual. Certain people seem to have issues, and that goes back to both nurture and nature, I think, and also the protective factors around them. I mean, I worked in PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I worked with what in the US we call Vietnam veterans, people who had fought in the war between the US and the Vietnam and Vietnam. And we found that those who had no social support when they came home or when they left, for example, broken families, divorced, maybe had kids but didn't talk to them, didn't have access to counseling services, those people did much worse with post-traumatic stress disorder than did people who came from intact families, came home to a large family with a lot of support, or came home and had very quick access to counseling. Those people did much better. So similarly, we're finding that it's much more individual, that if you don't have those things, you're not going to be as resilient. If you don't have the support, access to counseling, etc., all these protective factors. So the short answer is no, we haven't found any difference between generations, but it may still be there. There's a lot of research that could be done.
Yeah. So it's more stereotypical, but there are always young people who are as resilient, if not more resilient than us.
Yes.
I guess I agree with you. The young psychologists who have worked with me and able to continue to work with me, I think they are quite resilient.
Tough boss. Yes, I think it really is.
I criticize them to make them better.
It's good for them.
I didn't criticize. I give feedback to them.
Constructive feedback.
Constructive feedback from my side.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think we can help them. I do think that there are people in this and probably every generation who are coddled. We talk about, in the US, we have competitions, but they're not really competitions because everyone gets a medal. Everyone's a winner. And I think it's just, the pendulum swinging forward and back. So, right now we're at the point where everyone feels like they have to praise everyone and make them feel good and ensure that they don't fail, that they don't feel like they have to fail. But I think it's important for kids today to fail. You're not going to be good at everything. I mean, I failed plenty of times, and all the leaders I've talked to have failed. The most successful have failed the most, paradoxically. So yeah, I think it's really up to us to ensure that they do fail, and then help them through that, help them get through the process. So
how to be resilient when they face failure, and how to learn from that failure to become better. That's what you're saying.
Yes, to make yeah. So failure, if treated the right way, makes you stronger, and it also, narrows your focus and puts you into a niche where you can succeed. You have to fail at things before you know you're not good at them.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you also talk with a lot of senior leaders, your clients. I'm sure they are at the senior positions. And a lot of time we approach things from different perspectives. As psychologists, we look more at the individual, especially the well-being of the individual. But when we talk to executive senior leaders, not saying that they don't care about individual, but of course, they have the bottom line. They have to ask, what's in it for me or the company? How will this benefit my company? So what's your experience in improving resilience? How can it actually improve the performance of a company?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I mean, companies are not charities. They're not there to, make sure everybody wins and everyone has a good time and doesn't get stressed. They have to turn a profit. I mean, it's really all about making a profit. So if your employee workforce is resilient, you will make more money, basically. I mean, that's it's a completely logical train of thought. So if your employees get burned out, we find that burnout is a precursor to leaving. And we've seen it a lot, especially in COVID. With COVID, I mean, we have an employment crisis now where you can't find enough workers. So there's actually a profit motive behind ensuring people do not burn out, ensuring that they are resilient, that they have the protective factors, that they're actually taught how to manage stress. And, it may be that these younger generations have not learned how to manage stress because, for instance, everyone wins, I haven't faced the stress of failure, even though I came in last in the race. So if you train people how to manage failure and how to manage the maybe increased workloads, especially as you can't find enough people to do the jobs, especially skilled people, then they won't burn out and they will stay with the company. And you won't have to continually train up new people if you can find them. So there's absolutely a profit motive behind ensuring people are resilient.
So what you're saying is when people are resilient, they stay with the company, and by staying with the company, they also improve their competence. They have the tacit knowledge that in the end will help the company to achieve their target and for the company to perform also.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
You don't lose that store of knowledge and skills. And as we know, as consultants, it takes a lot to, first of all, find a new employee and then train them and then manage them and teach them about the product, about how the company works, about how to get along with other people in the company. It's really tough, and it takes a lot of effort and time. So it's much easier, speaking purely from a financial perspective, to retain people and ensure that they are resilient and they can manage the stress that working in the company gives them.
Tim, one last question. Is there any tips on how to develop resilience other than, of course, measuring using the instrument?
Yes. Call us. I think, but seriously, I think you can teach people how to do things that are very simple, like mindfulness. If you can find an expert in mindfulness, they can train you on how to manage your thoughts. You can also ensure that people have social support. We talked earlier today, before this recording, about EAPs. Ensuring that people have access to an EAP, meaning employee assistance program, where they can just call up an independent psychologist to talk about issues they're facing. So if that's available, that's a real benefit for employees. And then just ensure that you're watching. So don't just watch for, did they complete the assignment, but how are they acting? Are they acting differently? Do they look depressed? Do they get very negative? If you notice that kind of thing, then it's time to have a chat with them and ensure that they get the help they need to maintain their own resilience.
Okay. Yeah. So, in one of the book that I read a long time ago, it started with this Buddhist saying, "Life is hard," and I think that book actually about the rational, emotive, or cognitive science approach to psychology. So that is part of what we can do to help people to develop resilience. Is that what you're saying? The cognitive science approach?
Absolutely. We come from a science perspective, and we Cal Talent is all psychologists. We are all scientists. We work with research scientists as well to develop these tools. This is not something you'll find in Vogue, but it's a very well-researched and based on theory tool. So that's our perspective. We don't, we will not use something that's not valid and reliable, because it's, first of all, it's not ethical, I think. But second, it just doesn't help. You don't know what you're getting. But we absolutely put this on a bedrock of science.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much. I'm sure if we talk further, we can talk for hours about resilience and also other things. But for the interest of the viewers, I guess this is a good introduction about resilience, what it is, and how to measure and how to develop. So again, thank you for being a speaker on this Pfizer podcast. And for the viewer, please click like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.